As we found out in our last video, Thomas Smith had been tried and sentenced. His notorious reputation as a fearless hired gun had now led him to the gallows. Come along with us as Bad Tom writes to the governor of the state of Kentucky for a stay and the response that is sent back to him, as well as the events that happened on the last day of his life, June 28, 1895, in Jackson, Breathitt County, Kentucky. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to help transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. The crowd. In the 1890s, in the Appalachian Mountains, public executions were seen more as a social gathering or a public picnic than a place to witness the justice system administering punishment. The public execution of Bad Tom Smith would take place under such a carnival condition. According to the Daily Public Ledger, Maysville, Kentucky, June 29, 1895. Quote, 200 armed guards patrolled the town, and Sheriff Combs had 50 armed guards around the scaffold. A great crowd of Smith's friends came to town Thursday night. 100-gallon jugs of whiskey were shipped into town by way of the Lexington and Eastern Railroad, but the officers of the road shipped it back to Lexington Friday morning, thus preventing a great deal of drunkenness. A large number of women and children were present, and it seemed more like a fair or a big picnic than a hanging. The scaffold was surrounded by a 7-foot fence so that the crowd could see Smith make his statement, but could not see him after the drop. Curtains were arranged to be pulled around the top of the scaffold post before the black cap was put on and the drop of 6 feet. According to the Yapot source, the number of men and women attending the execution was somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 people. Baptism. One of the most interesting events surrounding the execution in the Appalachian Mountains is the baptism. This is to be taken solemnly and soberly, and considered one of the most important and significant events in the entire execution. Before Thomas Smith would step over into the hereafter, like so many before him had done, he requested to be baptized. It really is not known as to the motives behind Smith's request. Some people thought that this was a genuine confession and atonement for the terror that he helped to inspire in the mountains. Others were not so convinced, as they thought that this was the reason behind Smith's request was to give B.F. French an opportunity to rescue him. On June 28, 1895, at 7 a.m., the date set by the court for the execution, Smith was escorted by Sheriff Combs and jailer Sinners with a heavy guard, 400 yards to the North Fork of the Kentucky River. There, Smith was met by Reverend Stephen Carpenter, Reverend J.J. Dickey, as well as other ministers to perform the service. Thousands of curious onlookers lined the banks of the North Fork River as Reverend Stephen Carpenter opened with a prayer. It was so moving that Smith began to weep, and the people in attendance began singing a baptismal hymn. Smith then walked into the water, where he was immersed by 3 preachers, and when he was raised out of the water, gave the crowd a smile. Upon his returning to the jail, Smith would stop and shake hands with those who held out their wishes of him of good luck and Godspeed. According to the Daily Public Ledger, quote, Jackson, Kentucky, June 29th. At daylight Friday morning, the crowd began to assemble to await the hour of Bad Tom Smith's execution, and by 7 o'clock, 1,500 people were on the ground. The doomed man rested well Thursday night, and ate a hearty breakfast of chicken, pork, and bread, drinking a cup of coffee and a half a pound of milk. At 7:30, Sheriff Combs, with a strong guard, led the prisoner to the river. 300 yards distant, where he was baptized by Reverend Stephen Carpenter, assisted by Reverend Thomas Kelly, a cousin to the condemned man. This scene was very impressive, as the prisoner walked into the water with the ministers, who sang impressive songs all the way. After his baptism, he was led back to the cell to await the hour of execution." Unquote. Telegram to the Governor of Kentucky. According to the same source, not everyone was convinced that the baptism was on the up and up when it came to the intentions of the condemned man. Quote, "Bad Tom Smith tried to evade the law at the last moment. The time set for the execution was 11:20. But just before the hour arrived, Smith told the sheriff that while he had been forgiven for all of the crimes he had committed in the French-Eversole feud, he had not been forgiven for the killing of Dr. Rader. He therefore begged Sheriff Beck Combs to give him more time, and that official postponed the execution to 1 o'clock. This was a ruse on the part of Smith to gain time and get a respite, for he had sent his brother Bill to the telegraph office and had this dispatch wired. Quote, "Governor John Young Brown, Frankfort, Kentucky, would like a few days' time, as I am an orphan boy and have no friends. Tom Smith." Unquote. At 12 o'clock the following telegram was received from the governor. Quote, "Tom Smith, Jackson, Kentucky. I must decline to interfere. John Young Brown." Unquote. Smith was very nervous while waiting for this reply, and he was unable to stand or sit still. He walked back and forth in the jail constantly. Occasionally he would stop to sing a song, in which 3 mountain preachers, who would have been with him for several days, would join. Unquote. When Sheriff Combs became aware of the message being sent to Governor John Y. Brown, he made the following statement to the crowd, after deciding to postpone the execution for a few hours. According to the Wikitree source, quote, "At 11:30 a.m., Sheriff Combs decided to postpone the execution until 1 p.m. in wait of a reply from Governor Brown, and sent one of his deputies to the gallows to address the crowd, who exclaimed in a loud voice, quote, 'The execution is postponed until 1 o'clock, so that the condemned can save his soul.'" Unquote. This announcement caused some irritation to the crowd, who dispersed for lunch, but soon reassembled, desiring to secure a good vantage point near the gallows. The clamor to witness the hanging was so palatable that the mass of spectators had assembled on a shed roof, causing it to collapse. However, nobody was injured in the incident. Unquote. According to the Daily Public Ledger, the drop fell at 1:45 and Smith died in 10 minutes. Promptly at 1 o'clock, Smith was taken to the gallows. Unquote. When Tom Smith climbed the gallows stairs, he made his confession about the killing of 6 men that he was sure of, and 2 men that he was unsure of died at his hands or at the hands of another man. He then made another statement to the crowd about how he came to the place that he was in now. According to the Wikitree source, quote, "Friends, one and all, I want to talk to you a little before I die. My last words on earth to you are to take warning from my fate. Bad whiskey and bad women have brought me where I am. I hope that you ladies will take no umbrage at this, for I have told you the God's truth, to you, little children, who were the first to be blessed by Jesus. I will give you this warning. Don't drink whiskey and don't do as I have done. I want everybody in this vast crowd who does not wish to do the things that I have done, and to put themselves in the place I now occupied, to hold their hands." Unquote. As he uttered these words, the hands of every spectator in the vast audience was raised upwards, and Smith continued by saying, quote, "That is beautiful. It looks like what I shall see in heaven. Again, I say to you, take warning from my fate and live better lives than I have lived. I die with no hard feelings towards anybody. There ain't a soul in the world that I hate. I love everybody. Farewell until we meet again." Unquote. According to the Daily Ledger, quote, he was surrounded on the scaffold by his spiritual advisors, and his sister, Quilly Smith, was with him. She kissed him goodbye and begged him to be prepared to meet her in heaven, and when she went down off the scaffold, Smith knelt down and made a long prayer with a loud voice. He then sang a hymn and prayed again. And then the rope was adjusted and the black cap drawn just before Sheriff Combs pulled the lever that released the trap. Smith screamed, quote, "God save me! God save me!" unquote. According to the Daily Ledger, quote, at 1:45 the lever was pulled and Smith's body fell 6 feet, breaking his neck. He was pronounced dead in 7 minutes, unquote. According to the Yapot source, quote, one of the touching incidents of the execution was the action of the widow of Dr. Rader, who was present with her 3 little children and Dr. Rader's brother. Just before the drop fell, she held her little ones up at arm's length so that they could look over the crowd and see the man who murdered their father, unquote. The grave of Thomas Bad Tom Smith. According to the sources, the exact location of Tom Smith's grave today is unknown. Although his body was taken from the scaffold and entrusted into the hands of his family and 500 attended to the Car Fork in Knott County. However, in 1976, the Car Fork Creek Lake Reservoir was constructed and the bodies in the cemetery had to be moved. Most of the bodies ended up in the Car Fork Memorial Cemetery in unmarked graves. However, there is a marker in the Vicco Baptist Church Cemetery, which bears Tom Smith's name and the epitaph, quote, "Bad enough to be hanged, not too bad enough for God to save," unquote. Thank you. We at Kentucky, Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notifications. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky, Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.